Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Waj, and for the last couple of days I've been living with the Dell UP2715k, which is one of the first standalone 5K monitors that's available right now. And the main question you're probably asking yourself is why the heck would anybody want to get a monitor that has 14.7 million pixels and has an asking price of over $2,500? And here in this review we're going to try to address that question as best as possible, see if there's any advantages or disadvantages of having a monitor like this in the first place, and really determine whether there's a distinct advantage of going with a 5K monitor opposed to all of the other great monitors that are available in the market. So if you're interested in that, let's get right into this review. Now, looking at the Dell UP2715k, you can see that the design is really simple and quite understated. The panel itself has a seamless edge-to-edge design, and the surface of the screen does have a slightly glossy finish. And in most lighting conditions, glare is not really going to be a major issue unless you're right behind a large window. Now, in terms of physical dimensions, the panel itself without the stand measures about 63.7 centimeters in terms of its height, 38.4 centimeters in terms of its width, and in terms of thickness, it only measures about 4.7 centimeters or about 1.9 inches. Now, the nice thing about getting a Dell monitor is they usually have a grade stand included, and this monitor is really no exception. We have 150 millimeters of vertical travel. We also have 5 to 20 degrees of tilt adjustment, and we have 50 degrees of left-right swivel capabilities. Or if you do want to wall or desk mount this monitor, you do have a 100 millimeter VESA mount connection at the back of the monitor. Lastly, you do have the other option of changing the orientation from landscape to portrait mode. Now, one of the major issues I have with this monitor is the way 5K is delivered from your computer to the monitor itself. And since it's such a massive resolution and hardware right now is really being established to kind of use this resolution to full effect, you do have to work around some serious limitations. And those limitations specifically pertain to the fact that you're going to need to use two DisplayPort 1.2 connections in order to get that full 5120 by 2880 at 60 Hz refresh rate, which therefore means that you're going to need a graphics card that has two or more DisplayPort connections. Now, that's certainly going to be a problem for a lot of you guys that may not have a graphics card that has multiple DisplayPort connections. I'm using the GTX 980, which has three DisplayPort 1.2 connections. In fact, all of the newest 900 series from NVIDIA have a multiple DisplayPort configuration, and I'm sure the latest generation of the 300 series cards from AMD will have those too. But for most people that don't have those latest generation cards and don't have really extreme end cards that have multiple DisplayPort configuration, this monitor can't be used at that full 5K resolution. Now, you can employ the mini DisplayPort connection to get 3840 by 2160 at 60 Hz refresh rate, but that really defeats the purpose of getting a 5K monitor in the first place. Now, just on a side note, recently they have announced the DisplayPort 1.3 protocol, which is approved for 5K resolution at 60 Hz refresh rate. We have a lot more bandwidth to play on the 1.3 DisplayPort standard than the 1.2 that we currently have, but unfortunately this monitor ships at a time where 1.3 isn't a standard, and no GPU available right now has the DisplayPort 1.3 protocol enabled. So we'll definitely have to wait and see how things play out, but it would have been nice to have DisplayPort 1.3 compatibility, especially in the fact that you're buying a very expensive monitor that you're probably going to keep for a long time. Now, taking a look at the ports and connectivity at the back of the monitor, we encounter a mini DisplayPort connection or a Thunderbolt connection, so you can easily connect this to your MacBook Pro or Mac Pro and use this as a 4K display. Again, in order to get the full 5K display, you're going to need to use those full DisplayPort connections, and we have two of them right there. Next, we have USB 3 upstream connection to connect to your computer, because this monitor actually has a 5 USB 3.0 hub built in. So we have 4 ports right there, and we also have one additional USB 3 port that acts as a battery charging port. Now, it's obviously nice to have all these USB 3 connections, but the problem is the placement. All of them are located at the back of the monitor, and that's certainly not the most convenient location when you're trying to plug in a USB thumb drive or other USB 3 devices. Thankfully, the SD card reader is located at the side of the monitor, and that right there is very logically placed and very easy to access. Now, another minor issue I have with the connectivity is the fact that we don't have an HDMI 2.0 connection. Now, obviously, we don't really need it, but again, since you're paying this kind of money for a monitor, you should have every connection available to you. And HDMI 2.0 is a standard that's up to the level of DisplayPort 1.2, and all of the latest generation graphics cards have it, so it would have been nice to see on this monitor. Now moving right along, one of the other highlights of this monitor is that it has built-in Harman Kardon speakers, and typically with most monitors, built-in speakers are absolutely a throwaway feature. And here the speakers themselves are two 16-watt stereo speakers giving you a total of 32 watts, which means it has more than enough volume to fill up any kind of office space or any kind of moderately sized room, which is definitely nice. And the overall fidelity is not too bad. The speakers themselves are located at the bottom of the monitor, and they are designed to fire down and bounce on your table and reflect all around the room that way. And they definitely do a good job of reproducing mid-range and higher frequency sound. But when it comes to bass, since they don't have any kind of woofer or anything like that, you're definitely lacking in that space. And any audio source that you listen to that has a decent amount of low-end oomph is not going to translate well even on these higher-end monitor speakers. Now, I've reviewed a lot of different Dell monitors in the past. Most recently, I reviewed the P2715k, which is the 4K version of this monitor. And one of the things that all these higher-end Dell monitors have in common is that they have fantastic on-screen control systems, which are typically located on the bezel of the display right next to the screen. Now, in this monitor, in order to keep a streamlined look, they've actually relocated the button for the menu on the side of the display, which is not as ergonomically friendly and easy to use as previous monitors that we've encountered, but you can still navigate the menu with a certain amount of ease. Now, the on-screen menu on this Dell monitor is very typical of what you would expect to see from any higher-end Dell monitor. They're pretty much using the same system across their line, and generally speaking, very easy to control the overall picture settings. They have a number of presets that you can select from, and you do have the option to control contrast, brightness, sharpness, as well as the RGB values. Now, that level of control is perfectly suitable for consumer monitors, but since this is really targeted towards professionals, I would certainly expect to see a greater number of picture control settings. In fact, if you take a look at monitors within this price range, they usually have the ability to control the level of yellow, cyan, and magenta right onto the on-screen menu. And although you have a couple of different color calibration options in terms of hue and saturation levels, but when it comes to the color gain, you're only limited to the RGB color spectrum. Usually in this class of monitor, you do have a greater number of control settings when it comes to color gain within the built-in menu itself, but luckily you can get into your operating system and use your own color calibration software to adjust all of the hues individually. Now, that being said, one of the reasons why this monitor costs this much, besides the actual resolution, is that in terms of color accuracy, it is quite exceptional. It is a true 10-bit panel, and you have the ability to use 12-bit user-accessible lookup tables, so you can easily calibrate it for pretty much every kind of application you can imagine. Now, straight out of the box, Dell has pre-calibrated this monitor to obtain 100% sRGB color spectrum, as well as 99% of the Adobe RGB color spectrum. Now, if you do calibrate the monitor, you can exceed those values. Based on my particular presets, I got 103.1% of the sRGB color spectrum and about 100% of the Adobe RGB color spectrum, which is pretty darn remarkable. Furthermore, in terms of exact color accuracy, the Delta E rating, or the average color difference rating, I got down to about 1.44, which is really, really great. Basically, anything below 1 is imperceivable to the human eye. So the colors on average are very, very accurate based on reference charts. Now, in terms of the white point level, it hovers around 6582 Kelvin at the center point of the monitor, which is probably one of the best white point ratings on any UHD monitor that is available right now. And if you take a look at the surrounding regions of the monitor, the white point rating doesn't really deviate too much from that 6582 Kelvin rating. Now, let's talk contrast. Contrast is certainly an elusive thing to talk about. It's basically geared towards your testing methodology, and you really don't want to trust contrast ratios from different manufacturers, because everybody measures contrast a little bit differently, and my contrast ratio isn't certainly any exception to that. But basically, based on my test, maximum brightness where the backlight is completely torched, I got a rating of about 345 CDM squared at the center of the screen, and the surrounding quadrants of the display don't really deviate too much. It's pretty typical of what you would find most LED edge-lit displays to kind of perform at. Now, at the very minimum brightness, pretty much looking at the deepest black point we can achieve, we're getting a minimum luminosity of about 0.38 CDM squared, which is again not too bad for a black point, and the surrounding regions are again typical of most edge-lit LED displays and pretty evenly distribution of light. Definitely not too bad. So that means if we calculate our contrast ratio, we get about 907.8 to 1 contrast ratio, which is kind of similar to what Dell claims about 1000 to 1 typical contrast ratio, but this is a more realistic depiction of what you would get in a real world circumstance. Now, keep in mind that in most circumstances, you're not going to be completely going to be looking at the monitor at its maximum brightness settings. You're probably going to lower it down to about 250 CDM square to make it kind of usable and manageable for your eyes. Now, another great highlight of this monitor is its overall versatility in terms of viewing angles. You can pretty much view this monitor at extreme left-right angles with minimal color and brightness shifts. The contrast is also fairly consistent as well. And when viewing the display at different vertical angles, again, very similar consistency of what we've seen other IPS displays from Dell perform at, with minimal color and brightness shifts. Now, in video, it's pretty difficult to illustrate the experience you get with a 5K monitor, and if you haven't used that new 5K iMac that Apple just released recently, you might know what I'm on about. Some people like to use the analogy that they're looking through a window when using a 5K monitor, and that's basically the fact that since you have such a high pixel count of over 14 million pixels in a 27-inch screen size, you get that impression that you're actually looking at something that's real and that's physically there. So if you're reading a website or an article, it looks like you're reading a piece of paper. When you're viewing a photo that's really high resolution, it looks like somebody cut a hole in the monitor and you're looking at the photo in reality. And that's really the point of technology. Some people say, what the heck is the point of getting a 5K monitor or even a 4K monitor? And that's to basically replicate reality as real as possible. That's the whole objective of technology and entertainment. And since we have that kind of technology that's available now, you never have to go outside again. Now, just to kind of sum up all of our thoughts in this review, we're just going to do a quick pros and cons list. We'll start with the things that I liked about the monitor. First of all, it's the world's highest resolution standalone monitor available right now. And certainly that asking price is quite heavy, but that also comes with a big accolade. And that's the fact that this has a native resolution of 5120 by 2880, which again is unrivaled by anything else in the marketplace. And sure, there'll be a monitor that will be 6K and 8K that'll come out in the future. But right now, 5K is really the highest standard of what a single display can do. The other great thing about the panel, as we mentioned before, it's a 10-bit panel, and it has amazing color accuracy. It's up there with a professional grade reference panel, since it has over 100% of the sRGB color spectrum and very close to 100% of the Adobe RGB color spectrum if you calibrate it correctly. And as you saw from our average Delta E rating, this is certainly a monitor that's great for content creators, anybody that does any graphic design or web design, print shops, and a lot of other applications. So for business stuff, I could see how somebody could justify the major big price tag that this monitor comes with. Furthermore, another great thing is it comes with that very versatile stand, and the fact that you can mount it on a wall or put it on a desk stand is great because it has that 100mm VESA mount connection. Furthermore, the light distribution and uniformity of the panel is really quite good. It's the best Dell monitor that I've ever tested, where the light distribution is very even throughout the panel, and for an LED edge-lit display, that's definitely nice to see. Now, the list of cons is, firstly, it's not really a gaming grade monitor with the input lag of over 8 milliseconds response time. There's really not going to be any serious gamers that are going to invest in the 5K space at this point. Another thing is hardware compatibility is going to be an issue for a lot of folks that don't have access to 2 or more DisplayPort 1.2 connections on their graphics cards. Pretty much you need the latest, greatest GPUs that are available right now, the 900 series from NVIDIA, and probably the new AMD cards will have multiple DisplayPort connections. There'll be some other graphics cards from the past that had multiple DisplayPort connections that will support 5K resolution, but again, a very, very limited number of cards. So you're definitely going to have to upgrade your GPU to get this thing up and running at 60 Hertz at 5K resolution. Furthermore, the placement of the USB ports and the menu buttons are not ideal. I wish there was some USB 3 ports on the side of the monitor, making it a lot more easier easier to access. And I wish they stuck with the old design of keeping the menu buttons right on the bezel itself, opposed to the side of the monitor, where they're certainly not as easy to control as other UHD monitors from Dell. Continuing forward, this monitor is missing HDMI 2.0 connection. Now, obviously you don't need that connection as we mentioned before, but since you're going to be paying quite a bit for this monitor, you expect to find all of the latest and greatest connectivity options and interfaces. And if you don't have HDMI 2.0, you really are not offering the most, especially if you're charging a premium dollar for this monitor. Furthermore, since this has a glass edge-to-edge display, you are going to suffer from a little bit of glare issues, especially if you're in brightly lit conditions where there's a window right behind you, and it is a fingerprint and dust magnet. So you definitely want to make sure you're keeping this thing in a condition where you can control the ambient lighting, and make sure you're not touching it too much to avoid getting fingerprints on it. Furthermore, if you set this monitor at lower resolutions, let's say below the 4K mark, the interpolation is not as good as it should be. So for example, if you look at a 2560 by 1440 monitor that's at 27 inch, it's probably going to look better than this monitor set to 2560 by 1440. And that's probably to the fact that the software doesn't really do too good of a job of downsampling that 5K resolution down to QHD resolution and HD resolution. So if you're going to be using this thing at lower resolutions, you should avoid this monitor altogether. And lastly, we're going to address the big elephant of the room, and that is the price point. At $2,500, you can pretty much get 3 of the very fantastic P2715Q from Dell, which is an excellent IPS 4K monitor that delivers pretty much 98% of what this monitor can deliver in terms of clarity and overall experience at, again, a much more affordable price tag. And 4K monitors this year are going to drop like crazy. So this thing hopefully will also come down in price in the near future as early adopters invest in 5K monitors. And there's certainly some people that will go for this monitor if they want the best of everything. And if you're like that kind of person and want the best of what a monitor can deliver, this is probably the best monitor in the marketplace right now for productivity and content creation if you have no budget in mind. But that being said, again, for most practical people, 5K is not really an option that they're going to go with, but it's definitely interesting to see products like this compared against other products in the market. And if you're interested in that, definitely check out my full comparison against this 5K monitor against the 5K iMac that came out a couple of months ago, as well as I did a comparison against a 4K Dell monitor, the P2715Q, and this 5K monitor to see whether the 5K is really worth it from a 4K standpoint. So if you're interested in those videos, definitely check those out. But I'm that, guys. Thanks so much again for watching. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you liked the video, and we'll see you later. Take care.